Welcome to Interior Analysis. I'm David Jones,
I'm Evan Westman.
And I'm Jelani Kelly.
and today we are talking about the cult classic slasher film Scream. So I'm most curious about, is this your guys' first time seeing the movie? Have you ever seen it before? Experience with horror slash slasher?
It's my first time seeing it. I'm not sure if I've seen any slashers, but I have read scripts, like not for produced stuff, but I've read a couple of like contained thriller things that would probably fall under slashers just for like coverage jobs. So that's probably like the area where I'm most familiar with the genre.
This is my first time seeing it. It's not my first slasher. I think my first slasher was Halloween for a class that was called the horror film in Drexel. My first experience with anything similar to this movie was Scary Movie, and I don't think that's a good thing because all I'm thinking of is the "What's up, what was up" thing.
The original scary, the first two scary movies are genius. The
Okay,
amount
yeah,
of bits they have jam packed into every minute.
yeah. So that was my first experience with this.
Which is kind of
But
a love letter to Williamson. They have almost like they have I Know You Did Last Summer in that. They have Scream in that. They have
mhm.
Dawson's Creek in that. They have like everything he ever touched in that movie. At least the first one. The second one, they start to get more into the paranormal side of horror.
And then don't the rest just go downhill after that?
Scary Movie, yeah, they
Yeah.
really fall off because that's when the Wayans brothers leave, and then they don't know how to do comedy. It's just
hmm
more dramatic tone. It doesn't work out, but that's a whole different episode.
Yeah. But yeah, I did first time seeing this movie. I don't normally watch horror movies on my own, so this was also my first experience doing that. It was interesting. I wasn't spooked out. I was more laughing, especially at the intro.
The intro made you laugh. The iconic opening scene.
Oh man, like she made every single wrong decision that she could have in that intro. Oh man, I don't know any normal person that would have done anything that she did. Did she run upstairs at some point, or did that
No,
was
not
that
that.
Sydney?
See that's a whole different. We'll get into that. But I like your
Okay.
the intro thing here. So
Yeah.
to set the scene to any viewer or listener that is unaware of Scream, we'll take you back to 1996. At this point in
A year where
horror,
I think none of us were alive anyway, but
yeah,
yeah.
Nope.
yeah. So I'm -3, and the year for horror, it's just horror in general in the early 90s is really weak because you're pretty much just seeing like Friday the 13th, the 10th, Halloween the 7th, Nightmare on Elm Street the 45th, Hellraiser the 72nd, Leprechaun comes back to dead. Like it's really oversaturated and nothing's sticking. A lot of it's going direct to DVD, like Candyman, which just got a remake, and a little movie comes out called Scream, and it's released in December of 1996, and it makes 6 million on its initial release and has word of mouth that brings it back in 1997 to make over 103 million. So I'm kind of curious. It's proven itself. There's no need for us to have that discussion of its impact because there's 1,000 video essays on it, and we've seen the impact. We've got to live through this cabin in the woods meta humor that we see in horror. But I'm just more curious about how it stays with today, especially for first time viewers, especially for people who aren't versed in horror, because it's really a horror fan horror movie. Like the amount of references that make those moments worth it. Like you talked about how Sydney runs up the stairs. The reason I love that moment is because 10 seconds before or whatever, she's like,
hmm
it's insulting. It's always she's running up the stairs when she should be running out the front door. So it lives in this kind of logical realm where it's aware of itself, and it creates these situations where the characters are smart enough to know these things, but they still fall to these tropes because of realistic issues where she planned to lock
Right.
the door because she was under the impression the killer was outside. Her locking the door is what kept her inside, what kept her from being able to open it.
Uh,
Yeah, that was one thing I was kind of noticing. Like, I wasn't super paying attention to, like, oh, is this character being dumb? But I never had a moment where I was like, oh, wow. Like, the, like, stereotypical dumb horror character. I never felt like that was really the case in this. Like, I don't think any anyone was like brilliant in how they handled it, but there was like I think the movie like and the directors I forget the director Wes Craven, is he the director?
Wes Craven, yeah, we'll get to that, which is a whole nother
Kevin
thing.
Williamson, like I think they kind of put their money where their mouth was in terms of like we called out the trope and we didn't do it. Whenever there was like, oh, you're in this tight spot, it was always they got forced into it. Like they were trying to escape, and like the only way to do it was to get locked into a corner.
This was a film that were one of the first horror films. Wes Craven has always been a fan to showcase female point of views, even when he was doing indie horror with like the OG Last House on the Left, but he always tried to have smart characters. Like even in Nightmare on Elm Street, Nancy is very capable, and Sydney is also one of the more capable ones in this movie, Sydney and Randy, and that's kind of spoiler alert why they are able to survive what happens, because the movie is aware enough of itself that the people in it who lack the horror awareness die, like Casey in the beginning. When you would watch a horror movie from the 70s or 80s, these slasher films, there was always this kind of otherness to the entity. Like Michael Myers wasn't human, he was the boogeyman and he couldn't be killed. And Freddy's the night demon who comes in your sleep, and you know, you got Jason who somehow survived in a swamp for 20 years and then found a hockey mask. So there's just a lot of these givens that horror fans just accept. And Scream didn't allow for that. Scream, the costume is at every fine and dime that you can find. There's this ability that they call it the MTV generation if you read about the movie, but it's the first horror movie that showcased an MTV generation that lived with films. So these are characters who we're supposed to believe have 20 years with Michael Myers, who know those things. And that's why when the killer starts to play with them, there's this interesting aspect, because the killer also knows those things. There's a human aspect to him, and that's why they kind of fall to consequences, such as when that scene where Sydney runs up the stairs. It only happens because, and at that time, people speculate that's Stu in the Ghostface uniform, and we'll get to that later because you can actually discern who's who because they have different killing methods. But Stu really fucks up because Stu's kind of an idiot and he stabs the door and trips, and that's a character trait of Stu. He's not the smart guy, and that's what allows Sydney to get away, versus Michael, who you can turn around and he's right behind you and then run 30 yards and turn around and he's right behind you, but he only took steps. Like there's this kind of lapse in reality that horror fans just accepted before this movie, and that kind of changed things, which was a really cool thing, especially because since it's teenager driven and you don't really picture teenage POVs to be realistic. It's usually more fantastical or exaggerated.
Now, I would be inclined to believe everything you guys are saying about the smart people if it weren't for Dewey's dumbass.
Well, Deputy Doofus, they call him that, right?
Yeah, but why was he made purposely so dumb? Is it to make fun of like the incompetence of cops in horror movies?
What specifically? Like,
just any decision he made.
Well, he doesn't make too many. That's the thing. Like, he's really a passive kind of witness. Like, he's late to get the answer when she gets called, when she has to hang out with them, and they're like, Dewey, 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 and he comes out in his underwear. There's another moment where he just eats ice cream. He gets stabbed in the back because he sucks.
Yeah, also, and when he's eating ice cream, wasn't he supposed to, like, not let Sydney out of his sight? Like, in that scene?
Yeah, he's talking to the sergeant. Yeah.
Yeah, cop's like, hey, don't let her out of her sight. He's like, cool. I was like, isn't he supposed to be doing that right now?
And not realizing what the Gale Weathers, stupid name by the way, was doing to him. Like, just leading him on just so she can get information out of him, or
I think that's very believable, though.
Okay.
Especially because he admits he had a crush on her. Like, imagine if Beyonce came up and was like, do you want to tell me a little something, something? Like, that's his Beyonce. He's like, I was 21 for a whole year. I was watching the news report, Gale Weathers.
Fair.
So that's why I appreciate that this movie, in a genre where camp is present, because you can't divorce camp from horror. It just is impossible. I know a lot of people try to, but it's just, horror is so unrealistic that you just can't. It's just intrinsic to the genre. And I appreciate that this film doesn't shy away from it. And I think that comes from it being written by a queer person and all of its heavy queer undertones. I'm not sure on the first viewing if that hit, But as you rewatch it, if you ever rewatch it, there are very heavy undertones that Billy and Stu are gay lovers. And it actually plays to a lot of the horror tropes of the final girl as they die instead of Sydney, which is usually, as Randy puts it, what happens to the anyone who has sex. You know, if you're a virgin, you survive, but if you have sex, which Sydney does, she gives it up. But their demise, and there's like this really in-depth video on it, but there's this whole analogy between the knife penetration and how Stu's acting is before the reveal versus after they reveal, and he gets really close to Billy and he's like sniffing him and like snuggling and all of this, that. It's just heavy-handed in that way, which is interesting because you don't get a lot of queer representation in horror. There's little moments, but it's very under the rug and debated about later on. But this movie is one that kind of embraces it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys have that reading? Did you see that and think, oh my god, they're gay?
I didn't, but I think, like, I absolutely didn't until you said that, but I did at some point in school have to do a reading on Kevin Williamson. I'm pretty sure, like, a couple of things you've been saying throughout. I wasn't sure if I did, but, like, the couple mentions you've had of him, I'm remembering now that was brought up in the reading. So I think maybe it addressed that, but of course I haven't seen anything else that he's made, and at that time I hadn't seen Scream yet either, so I think that might have come up, but I absolutely could not spit it back to you. For watching this, I didn't see any kind of queer undertones, but if I went back looking for it, I might.
Same. I didn't pick up on that.
If there's one scene that you really can see it again, it's in the video store, because as Randy suspects them, they kind of push in on him and like their bodies are pushed up against him and someone starts playing with his earlobe. And then it's when they start talking about his movie Freak Mind losing its reality button.
I think maybe part of it was like I was just kind of like subconsciously not expecting that because it's the 90s. And that would have been a little early for that kind of representation. Or at least, like, if it had been a little more overtly, like, these two are gay, then I feel like I would have heard about that. Like, just whenever this came up, like, it would have been more known for that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Another big, not Scream-specific thing, because I don't want to credit this film to it. A lot of people do. A lot of people give this film credit for bringing comedy into horror. And I think horror and comedy kind of always work together just because of the nature of the beats and how the audience is played with. And I think that's why people like Jordan Peele are so good at it. But this film, I would be remiss to at least say, this film does embrace its comedic, satirical nature. It's not, I would never call it a comedy. A lot of, like, Sam Raimi, John Carpenter, a lot of those people passed up on this script when it was written. I don't know if you know this, Jelani, because you brought up Scary Movie, but the original title for this film was Scary Movie.
I had heard about that. I don't remember where from.
Because it's based off, the idea came to Kevin Williamson after the turn of the 90s when the Gainesville Ripper kind of went through colleges and just started killing people. And that's where he kind of got this idea about a teenage horror flick that kind of took place out of school. But he really refined it and like made it a love letter to the genre and labeled it Scary Movie. And a lot of people read it like a straight spoof. And it took Craven, and it took him being a big swing to kind of see this not as a spoof comedy, but more as a satirical horror film. Every comedic moment, in my opinion, comes out of the film commenting on either itself or the genre. And it's never because, like, oh, it's comedy. Dewey, I think, is a product of all the stupid cops I've seen in every Halloween and Friday and Nightmare movie.
That's
where,
what
like,
I was asking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're going to keep coming back. We're trying to make this episode as long as possible, so get that viewership. And because the one I remember the most is Nightmare. The main character's dad is a cop, and the climax of Nightmare is the main character being trapped in the house with Freddy, and like she sets the house on fire and she's like banging on the window, and like other cops are over looking at her like, should we tell the dad? I don't know. Should we? Is she in trouble? I don't know. And I think Dewey falls right in line with that. And it's smart enough to be like, okay, Deputy Doofus. And at least the teenagers know the police are dumb and know they can't go anywhere to help. And like, know this is like what they have to deal with. And they're very desensitized to it because of horror films. Like when they talk about, did you leave her spleen in the mailbox? I thought you left her liver in the mailbox. All like that fountain scene. It's a very desensitized group of kids.
To me, making the cops dumb seems like a cop out.
No pun intended.
I'm
No,
pretty
that
sure
was
that
very
pun was
intended.
intended.
That was 100% intended. I don't know how I feel about that, because if it wasn't for Dewey, like, there were other cops in the town, right? You had the old sergeant guy who
Those are the
didn't
two
used to-
cops that you see.
Yeah.
Those two represent the police force in this film.
Oh, boy. Okay, yeah, that town was screwed from the beginning, then, if that's the case. Okay.
Which is, it's just kind of a horror thing. Like, when you watch the first Halloween, you don't really see a whole police fleet. You see the one chief, and he's like, oh, you know... And then Donald Pleasance's character is like, no, he's evil. He was looking to his eyes. This evil. And they're all like, oh, you know, it's a good town. It's a good town. There's a lot of white people. They don't do things.
Well, I think that I was kind of feeling that as part of it. And to be fair, I'm not super familiar with this genre, but I kind of was noticing, like, I think part of what the horror is messing with, we're taking this setting of white suburbia that is stereotypically thought of as, like, pretty safe and making it unsafe. I think that, especially in, like, the 90s, which, like, had... I was remembering while watching this, like, there were a lot of 90s movies that were like set completely in and all about like white suburban life, like American Beauty, American Pie, probably another American movie.
Any like mid budget like comedy,
Yeah, like that was something that was coming up a lot, I feel like, at this time. And from what little I know of like the rest of the slasher genre, I think that's almost always the setting, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I think that's one part of it, is that like that's part of how they're like creating the horror. It's like supposed to be like, hey audience, like think about this. This guy could come break into your house. Isn't that scary? Like I think that's part of the feeling they're trying to evoke. But also like I think the police force is part of it too, because if you have a horror movie set in a city, police forces are usually a lot bigger in the city, so you can't have that like crutch as the writer of like, oh, there's 2 cops in this town and that's it, and like the fire department works for the entire district and can't get here for another hour if that's who you decide to call. If you had this happen in even like a relatively small city, you're gonna have a pretty decent sized like group of some kind of public service workers. Like you get the security guard from the building across the street to do something or whatever. But at best in like a suburban area that's like a little more secluded, I guess, the best you're gonna get is maybe like the neighbor who loves his Second Amendment right coming out with a shotgun. That's maybe the best you can hope for outside of dialing 911. I don't know. I was just kind of noticing that as like something that's sort of like a mechanic at play.
Yeah, I will say 2 things is like, and I don't pay attention. That's one of my issues as a screenwriter is like time in film I don't pay attention to. I know a lot of people get their rocks off to how time is used in film. And apparently like Scream uses it very well. I again don't pay attention to it, so I've never noticed it. And all the times I've seen this film, I've never been like, wow, this movie is really convincing in how it shows the real time. But apparently it does it well in some articles I've read. The only thing that I've really ever believed, like I've watched horror movies where like, specifically since Halloween's probably the most famous, like Laurie Strode at one point runs like across the street from like house to house because Michael's on her ass and she's like freaking out and she's not getting any luck. Whereas Scream is like, you see this giant house in the middle of nowhere. Like it's a giant estate with like acres of land. And you know, if you're calling the police, that's a minimum 20-minute drive. by that point, Ghostface will make fun of your ass, gut your ass, and leave your ass, and that's that. And I think that was the most like holy shit moment about Casey Becker's death. Is like, even if she had called the police after the first ring, there's no way. There is no way. She could have been as smart as she wanted to be. She would have died.
I mean, her parents were right there though, and she
They would've
didn't
died
think
too.
to
You
like.
think they would have stopped the two teenage boys with a knife
Well,
I mean,
who have
maybe.
already raped and murdered a woman a year later and got away with it and framed a guy?
I hadn't really been thinking about the opening scene retrospectively like that, maybe. But I guess, I mean, the thing that I guess right now is selling it for me is that, like, especially in that opening scene, both of them really did their homework on, like, first of all, who Casey was, which I guess, like, retrospectively, that's not so hard to do. They did go to school with her.
Well, they tell you at the fountain that Casey used to babysit Stu, and then he started dating her, and then she dumped him. So that's how he knew about her.
Oh, okay.
so there's the motive for killing her.
Thank you. Because, okay, that fills a bit of a plot hole that I was thinking of.
I wanted to get into that a little later, but this is one of the few horror movies that mixes really well with mystery. Like, every horror movie, you know
Right.
who the villain is. You know Michael is Michael. You never know the first time you watch a Scream movie who the Ghostface is. Even in the scripts, the only person who gets the full script is the Ghostface. They keep everyone in the production on the set in the dark because they want it to be as visceral as possible when they film that scene. Which is, I think, a very interesting and admirable ability. I think it's a little insane and unpractical. Like, just give the script their actors for a reason, let them act. But
Right. They got to
You know.
exist under artificial circumstances. Believably. Whatever that phrase
But that's
is.
how hard they go for this mystery element, which I think is the best in the first film. Because I think they set it up so much where it's like, is it the dad? Is Dewey even playing us? Is he really this stupid, or is he a mastermind at work? Is it the boyfriend who they already told you it was, but then told you it wasn't, but then told you it was again, but then told you it wasn't, but then told you it was again?
I knew Shaggy was one of the killers.
Did you before you watched it, or
Yeah.
did you like call it?
It was spoiled for me before I Watch Mojo just be like, for some reason I just retain information from when I used to watch their top 10s, and I remember seeing his face as one of the Scream killers from one of their top 10s, and I never forgot that. I just didn't know who the other one was. Then once it was dude, like, he was acting freaky the entire movie, and it's like, are they gonna go for that? It's kind of obvious. Okay, he was let off, but I know there's two killers because that was already spoiled for me. So is it really him? And then it's revealed it's him, and I'm like, okay. Just everybody was a suspect for that second killer for me at one point. Like, even the weather lady.
Were you convinced when he got stabbed, or like fake stabbed, when she's like,
no,
behind you?
because they didn't show it. Once I saw, like, they showed every other, like, they were showing off all the guts and stuff before, and then they didn't show him get stabbed, and it's like, no, there it is, he's the one.
See, I had the exact same read when I first saw this film, and that's one of the few things that like if you're not paying attention, I don't think you get that. But if you pay attention, the film rewards you for it. It's like, okay, you understand how this killer kills, so if you've been paying attention, you know this isn't legit. Which I've always found, I don't know, I like movies that don't belittle the audience and don't, like, they keep the audience on the same level as them. They're like, we're all humans, we're all smart. I don't need to try to preach to you. I don't need to be derivative.
As someone who didn't get it spoiled and was watching it for the first time, this really did keep me guessing, and that was maybe like my favorite thing about the experience of watching it. I didn't love this by any stretch, but like I did enjoy, like, I really didn't know who it was the whole time, and I was trying to guess throughout. I think I wrote off Billy actually as soon as he got accused, because I was like, okay, it's obviously not going to be him. He's the first one that was accused. And later I was like, okay, this movie clearly understands horror tropes. How smart is it going to be with this? Like, is it going to ultimately play into them despite calling them out, or is it going to try and trick us? So I really had no idea until the final reveal. But my horror movie literacy is definitely the lowest of the three of us. So that might be part of it.
I hadn't thought about this until I rewatched it kind of recently, not for this episode, but I had like went through like a Scream binge like during quarantine, and I had never realized like they're obviously talk about the virgin trope that starts with like Laurie Strode and just kind of like the light pure character that is able to survive any horrific thing that comes their way. And I appreciated more now when I watched it that time that after Sydney gave up her virtuous virginity that they talk about in horror films for so many decades, she was still able to like outsmart them and kill them, and they actually die for it, which like subverts that trope of the virgin that Randy talks about earlier. While there's also like the meta directing when she's in the closet and she looks at Laurie in the closet, and then Laurie strikes and she throws the TV on Stu's head. And there's also that moment where Randy says, "Jamie, behind you," and that's Jamie Lee Curtis, but Randy's played by Jamie Kennedy.
Yeah.
So he's really, and Ghostface is behind him. So there's like, at a certain point, it's like, how meta are we getting, Kevin Williamson? Like, you're referencing a movie while referencing yourself, while referencing another movie that you're making. It's too much at a certain point.
One thing that, and you were sort of talking about this, so maybe this is a point we can bring this up. There were two conversations that we've had on the show before that this made me think of. So when we did Kingsman, we were talking about how much of a parody is this, and like it's kind of doing all the spy movie things but also calling them out. And then when we talked about Knives Out, we asked like, is this a movie that you could only appreciate if you've seen other mystery stories? And I was kind of asking that with this, like, is Scream a movie that you can only appreciate if you have seen other horror movies that it's calling out? And then with the Kingsman comparison, like, is this subverting genre tropes? And on top of that, is it then creating something new, or is it just calling them out and then still kind of doing them? Because, like, and maybe this isn't the most fair comparison, but Kingsman, I would say, still counts as like a spy action movie, despite the like commentary on the genre that it makes.
Yeah, there's a video on this too, and I think it's like totally original. Like, I think it stands on its own. Like, I don't think you have to see any horror movie to get Scream, but if you've seen the horror films, if you've done your homework, you're just gonna be rewarded. Like, there's only bonus to it. But I think that's the genius behind it. And I think that is why Wes Craven, because Wes Craven went for a meta movie. If you guys ever watch Wes Craven's New Nightmare, it's the only other Nightmare movie he directed. And it's the only other kind of good one, but it's very meta. They follow the actors playing themselves, and Freddy has pretty much come out of the script to haunt them and like terrorize their lives. And it's okay, but you can totally see Wes Craven like dipping his toes in this meta format. And I think that was like 94 or something, a couple of years before Scream. But I think Scream allowing himself to have a completely fresh IP that he wasn't attached to before. And I think also because he came at this purely as a director and not a writer. I think if they made the Scary Movie script that Kevin Williamson wrote and they followed it in that spoof way, it would be more of a forgettable film. But I think because it was able to exist in the genre while commenting on the genre and bringing something new to the table that we hadn't seen before, I think that's why it had such the impact. And I don't know if anyone could have done that vision if it wasn't for Wes, which is why they're making a new Scream movie. And I don't know about it because Wes has been dead for a few years, and I don't know. I don't think Scream works in a modern social media setting, because is he just going to Instagram live his kills?
Yeah, that was a note that I made, was this is one of those movies that couldn't work post smartphones, or even like post people act like. I laughed out loud when somebody goes, "Is that a cellular telephone?" I was like, "Wow!"
Every time they say cellular telephone,
so
take
dated.
a shot and you'll be wasted.
Well,
how many boys your age have a cellular telephone, son? Everyone's got them, Sheriff. Everyone's got them.
Oh my god. I remember my question. Is Shaggy dead? Does he not come back in a sequel?
Okay, this is interesting because originally, if you guys ever continue this series, Scream 3 is by far the worst one, and it is directed by Craven, but it's not written by Williamson. And what happened was they had written a script, and it pretty much became the TV show The Following that Williamson did in the 2010s with Kevin Bacon. But pretty much, Stu survived, and he created this network of like killers pretty much that are Ghostface killers, and Scream 3 was going to be him and these Ghostface killers terrorizing Sydney. But then everything happened. Oh, blank. What? Oh, this is going to be terrible. That school shooting, the main school shooting.
Columbine?
Columbine happens, and that whole script got thrown away because the whole kind of thing was him recruiting high school students. And then it became this really bad movie that takes place in Hollywood based around them making the movie based off the events in the Scream film. And it's just bad. It's real bad.
Oof.
It's like
That, yeah.
it's like what you would expect from like an original idea from a writer that like got detached in a studio, put like machine people on it, and it's bad. They're like, just do what Kevin Williamson did. You got it.
Yeah, that always goes well. This
So he didn't survive then.
Nope.
Okay. I was a little worried. They did double tap
They double tap Billy. Yeah.
Billy.
But they keep that window open because the legend has it that he wrote these films all in a weekend, or at least the first film he wrote in a weekend. And then when he submitted the first script, he had a treatment for the second and third. Which also leads me to this kind of point where, like, if Scream was made today, at least originally with Williamson and the whole cat, like, would it be made as a TV show?
That's a hard question because I think it implies that Scream didn't exist in the 90s, and then where does that put the entire like cultural conscience around horror at this point? Like, because also this would, I mean, from my perspective, the only like reshaping the horror genre movie that I know of is Get Out, and maybe there are others that I don't know of, but like
A lot of people credit Cabin in the Woods.
I was gonna say that.
Yeah, so you're releasing Scream post both of those movies, and I wonder, like, do you get Cabin in the Woods if you don't have Scream?
Right.
I don't know.
No way.
So, like, I'm not trying to, like, avoid the question, but I think, like, it's really hard to say because I think
understand.
we have to...
Let me rephrase. Because my inquisition is more around Scream did get an MTV show that sucked. Never watch it. But I do wonder, just because the nature it's written, and I've talked to Coughlin about this, and like he kind of accredits it to like Williamson writing TV at the time, so he was in that headspace because like the movie's dialogue heavy, and just the fact that like I don't know a lot of people who submit treatments for a second movie and a third movie like that to me sounds like you're submitting seasons to a TV show. So it's interesting that that's the way he went about it, to me at least. And I would wonder what this would look like as like a 10 episode like mystery horror series where like they kill off someone each episode and you try to figure out who the ghost face is. Because I can also see that happening, especially in the climate where like only movies that are getting made nowadays are like $100 million things and everything else is getting TV shows.
Yeah, I'd say this would be a TV show if it were made today, especially because of that mystery aspect. I think if it were more of like just, all right, there's a guy with a knife chasing a few people around and killing them, and that's it, then no, that's not a TV show. Like, those have to be, I feel like, contained thrillers that you watch in one sitting. Like, and I've never been a big fan of those, but I feel like that's the experience, like, that's the way you're supposed to experience them, is like all in one sitting. This is just like a horrible situation, go on this ride. That I don't think would work as a TV show. But with this, you do have that mystery element and multiple kills that happen over like a little bit of a longer period of time. So I think you could make it work. 10 episodes might be stretching it a little bit. I don't know if it could. I mean, taking the exact content of this movie, like, I don't think you can do that in 10 episodes. But yeah, I think that would be the format it would come out in right now.
And I'm curious because the intro did not work for Jelani. But I wonder, did it work for you, Evan? Because I think the reason it works the most is a lot of the marketing around the time. Like when Scream was getting marketed, it was pretty much, if you can see in Evan's thing, the top right, there's that little ghosted white face of Drew Barrymore gasping. That was like the first poster, was just that blown up and it said Scream. So everyone thought Drew Barrymore was playing the main lead. And originally she was casted as Sidney Prescott. But she told Wes, I think it would be more impactful and more jarring if the star on this cast is killed up front, because now the audience knows no one in this movie is safe. And was that the impact you had when you saw someone like as big as Drew Barrymore cut in like 5 minutes?
So, I hope this doesn't disappoint you, but no, because I didn't know that was Drew Barrymore until the credits.
I'm sorry, Drew Barrymore, if you're listening to this.
Yeah, apologies to whoever's offended by that. I did not recognize Drew Barrymore there. What I did wonder about the opening was, because I knew very little about this. I think I'd heard, I definitely heard it talked about, but I also definitely have gotten it confused with other horror movies like it, because they're all other movies that I haven't seen. I was wondering if that scene was actually going to extend the entire movie, and the whole thing was going to be him calling her on the phone and like it just escalating.
Oh, like some, yeah.
Yeah, like a contained
when a stranger
thriller.
calls. That's
Sure.
that's literally when a stranger calls.
Okay.
If you're
so
ever
something
interested
like that.
in getting that fantasy, that's that movie.
I mean, it wasn't exactly a fantasy so much as it was more thinking about, like, I didn't know how big of a budget this had. I figured, like, one setting, that's a good way to do a low budget thing. And this was the first in a series. So, they might not have had that kind of resources. I don't know.
Like The Purge?
Also haven't seen that, so maybe. But, oh yeah, I know, the first Purge movie is just one house, right? From what little I know of it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, so I was kind of expecting it to all be in the one house. And I think the only clips I've ever seen from it are of Drew Barrymore in that house. So I was wondering, like, that's what I was thinking of. Long and short of it, like, I don't think that scene had the impact it was meant to for me. The only impact it really had, I guess, is that was the only point in the movie where I was scared in any way, because the idea of just a regular person on the phone who has done a lot of research on you, calling and stalking you, like, that is, like, the only thing that legitimately scared me in any way in this, because I was just like, wow, okay, like, stalkers are a real thing. This could happen to somebody. So, like, I don't know if that is the impact it's supposed to have, but that was the only point where,
I think
like,
so.
there was any kind of fear for me at all.
I think the opening scene is supposed to set up the rules of this world. This is a world where horror movies exist, where people are aware of them, and depending on how aware you are and how smart you are will ultimately decide your survival. Like, even there's that moment where they ask who's the killer in Friday the 13th, and she's so quick to the gun that she says Jason, which is a very, very, like, come on, like, anyone would do that. Like, if anyone was like, who's the killer in Friday the 13th? It's like, oh, Jason, like, in that high stress situation, I'm not thinking of Pamela Voorhees. So, like, there's just those moments where I'm like, yeah, and there is that kind of hyper realistic nature to just a guy in a costume from a Spirit Halloween and a knife and a Bowie knife coming to get you, and he just called you because he has your number because you used to date and you don't know it, and he put on a voice changer. And Scream as a series evolves with the times. Like in the second one, Sydney gets caller ID, so she's able to discern before, things like that. But especially in the first one, that kind of blissful suburban nature is very much so disrupted with that realistic killing spree that goes on. And I enjoy the opening scene because I think it's scary. I personally am like, yo, if this ever happened to me, I'm just giving myself to the killer. Like, I'll just lay on the floor and just be like, come on, well, this is there's nothing going on. But yeah, I really enjoy, I think the opening scene does a great job in setting up the world, how it works, the consequences to if you fail. I like the meta-ness of it in the sense that, like, I don't remember the exact line, but he's like, what's your favorite scary movie? And then she says Halloween while she's picking up like the Michael Myers knife. And then later on, they ask about Nightmare on Elm Street, which is like a Wes Craven film, if you are a fan of his. And she goes, the first one was good, but the rest suck, which is like a very strong critique of the franchise. And I also think that's just admirable for a director. Like, I don't know a lot of directors that would allow that to be said in a movie they're making about their own franchise. Like, I think a lot of egos would be hurt. But Wes Craven was like, yeah, which I appreciate. I really respect that.
I will say, even as hard as I was laughing, I do think the intro was probably the scariest part. It was like the rest.
Hands down, in my opinion, that's the scariest part of the film.
Even when the other people were getting chased and then dying left and right, it was just like, all right, okay, cool. Like when he said, I want to know who I'm looking at, I was laughing hard as hell, but because of her reaction to him saying that, but also like, what? That just creeped the hell out of me. And I knew she wouldn't get away, but it was how close she was to being rescued by her parents.
So brutal, yeah.
That made it pretty bad. And then he hung her. Like, not only did he kill her, like he put her body on display on a tree in their front yard. It's like, bro, that's
one of my favorite aspects of the opening scene is there's a lot of subtleties in Craven's directing. And you see the tree in like a wide establishing shot of the house, and it's right in the center of the composition, and it's there for like a couple seconds and it's gone, and you don't think anything of it. Like, you just think, what a nice peaceful house, and then that tree comes back 10 minutes later to have her body on display. And there's another moment where like there's a shot where Casey is like up against her door, and it's shot in 3 panels, and you see her face, and it's like when Ghostface is lying to her, she's on the left or right, but when he's telling her the truth, she's in the center. So there's just little visual cues like that Craven puts in if you do rewatches that are like, oh my god, which you just didn't get in horror films because people weren't putting that kind of effort into Leprechaun 4 and 5 at the time. Also, this is for me personally. Did any of you get that was Wes Craven dressed up as Freddy Krueger in the janitor outfit? When the principal...
I didn't know that was him. I knew it was a reference to Nightmare, but I didn't know that was him.
Yeah, that's him dressed up as Freddy, which is always just like a cute little nod. See, those things, like, I think are cute if you like horror, but I don't think not knowing them is like detrimental to the film's viewing process. Like, I don't think you lose anything.
Oh yeah, I forgot the principal was one of the people that died. He was the second person that died.
Yeah, and then that's actually one of the aspects of the time in this film that's really impressive, is because they kill the principal, but then later on call to it when they're like, oh my god, the principal's dead, they hung him up, and then they leave. I don't know why. Like, I read a couple articles about how that scene specifically is impressive for film timing. I never got that. Like, I never watched that and was like, wow, that movie... that was really clever. Like, to me, it just made sense in the sequence. Like, we saw it, and then we got a result from it. Like, it never felt like it was time-stamping the film to me in that way.
That, I don't know the actor's name, but I just see him as, I think he's the acting teacher in Barry. What?
He's the Fonz.
Oh, wait, no, I thought it was him, too. God, I'm blanking on the actor's name now. Henry Winkler. I don't think it's actually... Wait, is it actually him? Because I was looking for that in the... Oh, it is him. Okay. Why did I not see his name in the credits then?
Yep, they got the Fonz. You don't suspect him, but then he kind of gets weird with the kids. Like, he's like, they should rip your insides out and hang you like the scum you are. And you're like, whoa, well, you got it right on the nose with expulsion, but threatening these kids is a little far now. So then they start to get that, but then he gets killed, so... I also don't really get the point to kill the principal, and I get, like, the movie talks that there's no point to have motives. Like, motives are, it's the millennium, why have a motive? But...
well, school's out. They want a school to be out forever.
So I had a question about that, though, on, like, the genre level, because he says, oh, no motive is scarier. So the movie and the character know that no motive is scarier, and then not 30 seconds later, he's telling his motive. So, like...
now I know Stu's motive. I didn't know Stu's motive, but now I...
Stu didn't have a motive. Stu was just an
idiot. After Casey.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess for Casey. Yeah. That's probably how we manipulated him. But even when on the phone, they're like, what are you going to tell the cops? And he's like, peer pressure. I'm far too sensitive. Stu has no idea what's happening.
Yeah, he Yeah.
He's just his lapdog, and that's what Randy calls him earlier. I think Billy's the real mastermind of it, but I think you're right. I think the only reason that doesn't bother me is because I always read that moment as like, wow, this guy is really batshit. Does he hear the words coming out of his mouth? He's like, well, I have a motive. Did Hannibal Lecter have a motive for why he wanted to eat people? I don't think so. So like, he's comparing himself to these iconic horror characters, like already kind of crazy. And then he goes into why it's actually a motive. So it's like, okay, you really see this guy. He's not a horror character. He's a human. He's contradicting himself.
Yeah.
He's lying. He's traumatized. He's detached. And he's reacting in this way and is really bad. And it's only going to get worse. And I think that's one of the good reasons that, like, they have consequences. They're able to be beaten versus previous horror films of the time. It's like, just run.
I did really appreciate how much they got their asses kicked by like people trying to get away from them. Like, how many times did they fall over or get stumbled by like a door or something?
Yeah, and Tatum, she throws the bottles of beer. Like, they try. They really fight.
Mm-hmm.
And then she gets crushed by
the door. She gets pulled up.
Door. That's probably the dumbest scene in my opinion. But like,
it's one of those scenes where like you're like, why would you do that? But at the same time, like, I don't know what I would do. Like, this guy has been on a killing spree. You're at this party in the middle of nowhere. You're in the garage alone, and here's the killer. And she doesn't think it's the killer at first. She thinks they're just playing a prank on her. But then, as it escalates, it becomes very apparent that it's the killer. And like, I don't know how I'd react. I'd like to say I wouldn't go through the doggy door, but
pick up one of the pieces of glass that you threw at him and stab him.
You know, as someone who's sitting in my nice house in a controlled temperature with no killer, that's a very rational way to think.
Yeah, well, how does she get stuck? Like, I don't...
Her shoulders, I think. She can't get both her shoulders through. She gets, like, one arm through.
I think the bigger question in that scene is, like, why do they have a cat door in their garage? That was I think that's the bigger buy of that scene. Like, I can see her getting stuck in there. Like, I crawled through a couple of those when I was like 5, but if I tried doing that now, like, I think it'd take me a minute to get through. The bigger buy for that scene to me is like that they have a cat door there at all. People have that, I feel like, on their back doors. I don't think I've ever seen one on a garage, but maybe I just haven't been to the right people's houses.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a thing of the times. I don't know what that is. I've never seen a cat door on a garage either, but I've never questioned it because they start the scene with like her opening the garage, like she clicks it, and then there's like another moment where you see another hand click it and you realize it's Ghostface. So I think as far as like cinematic logic, I always just took it for what it was because they showed us it before, but I've never, I don't know why they have that cat door there.
Do they even have a cat?
What really got me was how, like, in the final scene in that house, because, like, obviously Stu knows the layout of his house, and, like, that's why he's able to beat her through all the places, but, like, goddamn, how many doors connect to the same fucking places in rich people's houses?
Yeah.
Like, it was just door after door and just circular moves, like, oh, I shut this door, go over here, oh, there he is. I'm like, how many doors is in this house?
Yeah, that was a really big house.
That always got me. I was just like, Jesus Christ. Like, it makes sense how he knows how to get around. It's his house, but it just was like, wow, what a house.
I did think that, just a little note on the mystery of it, I was wondering for a little bit if the killers were cops, because wasn't there a point where like 911 was jammed? I think in the opening. I feel like there was something where somebody tried to call 911 and it didn't work while they were being called by the killer. So for a minute, actually for the whole time, I was wondering if maybe it was going to turn out to be a cop. I don't know if that matters to anything, but that was one guess that I had, because that would be a pretty good subversion of the genre, where the person that you stereotypically call for help in the situation is the one who is stalking you.
Well, it's also Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Another good movie. That's a fucking that's one of those movies that you just can't unsee.
I forget which one it was though.
That's the first one.
Oh, I'm thinking of the was it mid 2000s?
The next chapter one.
Whatever had
Matthew
that
McConaughey.
one guy that was it him?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the one with the old bald guy that has a really distinct voice.
Oh, there's the old bald guy is like Bubba's like granddad, so he's in a few.
No, he was the sheriff. He was the sheriff, and he tried to frame the nerdy kid. It was.
I'm not sure which one. I just know the first one. She like escapes them, and then she goes to get help, and then help brings her back to that house, and it's like, oh shit.
Okay, so that happened in the first one as well, but
Yeah.
in this one, oh god, I don't know any of the. I feel like one of the actresses' names is Jessica.
There's just so many Chainsaw movies.
Okay, but it happened in those two where you think you're safe because, you go to the people that are supposed to protect you, and they're like, nope, we're on it too. Here's a chainsaw, and then they kill you. So it did happen in those.
And Scream has a moment with it, like when Sydney's getting chased up the stairs and she jams her door with her closet door, and then she like dials 911 on her computer, and then she goes back downstairs and she opens the door, and there's Dewey holding the ghost face mask, and it's like, ah. So there's kind of that moment where the movie wants you to kind of fall down that rabbit hole, but it never commits to it.
Why would he be holding the mask up in that moment, though?
I think it's just to show how dumb he is. He even screams at her, too, with, like, holding the gun. Like, he should not be a cop. Even to the point where Tatum is like, let's go, Deputy Doofus, and he's, like, whining to her. He's like, Mom tells you not to call me that. When I wear this badge, I'm a man of the law.
Oh, wait, he's her brother. Okay. That feels... Okay. I thought for a second...
That's why they were together
he
in the
was
house.
Her dad. I thought for a second he was her dad, and then I was like, wait, he's 25, though. And I was like, that must have just been a different character that looks like him that I got confused with. Okay, makes much more sense. Thank you. I was just doing a bad job watching it.
Also, he has no reaction to his sister being dead. He doesn't find out about it.
He doesn't know. We don't get that till Scream 2. They have Sydney and him have like a reconvening moment, and then they talk a little bit about Tatum. No one sees Tatum's body except for Sydney because she dies on like the back end of the house.
Tatum's definitely the best character, I think, though.
Really? A lot of people give that to Randy.
No, I couldn't stand Randy.
Really? That's really changed with the times then. When this movie came out, Randy was like the voice of the audience.
Well, he gives movie fans a bad name. Like,
I don't think so. I think he's very accurate to how movie fans are.
Plus, I've only ever seen Jamie Kennedy in
The Mask too.
Son of the Mask too. Yep, well, Son of the Mask. So I it's not a good track record with him as an actor.
There he is. Son of the Mask is classic cinema. See how much that hurt him? See, Randy was an exact representation of fan people. He said that to Randy, Randy would have the same reaction.
Oh no! Oh god. Maybe I relate to Randy.
His mom.
Maybe I relate to Randy more than I think. I just still found him annoying.
I relate to Randy the most. He's aware of the genre, but he still succumbs to it. He's human enough to the flaw.
And also, there was that really weird scene he had in the video store, like where he was just shouting about a bunch of horror movie nonsense, and it's like, you got fired from this job already. You came back, and now you're just shouting. Yeah, you're just shouting nonsense.
I mean, it wasn't nonsense, though. He was right? He said, if you were the only suspect in a murder case, would you be standing in the middle of the slasher aisle? And he was talking to the two killers.
Yeah. But also, who says that?
I mean, a film geek. A horror film geek. Like, the most horror film geek of all horror film geeks. Because they try to give a Randy-type character, because Scream 4 is, like, rebranded as, like, the next generation, and there's, like, a Kirby character, and I don't think it works as well.
Kirby?
Yeah, her name's Kirby. It's played by... Oh, God, it's not Natalie Portman. What's her name? She was in that Nashville show.
Kirby?
Yeah, her name's Kirby.
I'm just thinking of the Pink Blob.
Yeah,
trust
same.
me, I know, that's my main in Smash. I fucking love Kirby. Hayden Panettiere, that's who it is. She plays Kirby in Scream 4, and she's the female version of Randy. But yeah, Randy's like the fan favorite. I'm surprised that you detested him so much.
I didn't like.
I don't think I liked any of the characters, to be honest.
You didn't like any. I was surprised. I understand if you didn't like Gale, because in the first one, Gale is really just like hard to like, but she's kind of iconic in the same way.
I guess Sydney was cool, but she just had main character syndrome in my eyes, where she was kind of just.
I found Sydney surprisingly accessible. Like, I was rooting for her more than I expected throughout. Gale, I guess I can see where you're coming from with iconic. I just like.
Oh, she has some of the most iconic lines in the movie. Kenny, I know you're about 50 pounds overweight, but when I say hurry, it means move your tub of lard ass now! Like, that is just. That is an iconic line. She's not a good person, but that is a memorable line.
I just am not a fan of like that kind of journalist trope. I prefer like I feel like there's two ways to portray journalists. One is this, and the other is like the Spotlight House of Cards kind of journalist. I love the latter. Like
I'm the
those
opposite. See, I don't like serious
Yeah.
things.
The journalists are always my favorite characters in House of Cards.
You guys seen Clickbait
No.
on Netflix? You haven't seen Clickbait? There's a journalist in that does the dumbest thing to get the scoop, get the story, and it messes with his relationship and stuff. I'm gonna go further in case you want to watch it, but
Sounds like a hard miss for me.
it's only in one episode out of the is it 8? It's either
Oh.
8 or 10. But I'd recommend the show. It's a mystery that builds in each episode going on until the ending episode is focused on a different character. And it builds with the mystery and gives you more questions and answers, and it's really I think it's really narratively told really, really, really well.
I'm just surprised you didn't like any of the characters, Jelani.
Yeah, nah. Like, I didn't realize it after watching it, or even during watching it, but, like...
I don't know if there's a
saying it,
character I don't like in this movie.
I don't really care.
I don't
for
really
him.
like Kenny. Kenny's kind of a waste.
Who was Kenny?
The
I don't
camera
remember
guy.
either. Oh. Did he even say anything? Did he have any lines?
Oh no, he's so much of a waste that when I think of him, I think of like the Scary Movie version of him and like the lines that version of him has, because he's that much of a waste.
I feel like he was like a lesser version of Kronk from Emperor's New Groove. Like that kind of archetype.
Oh.
That's what I
enough
thought
that.
of.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
He is Kronk,
Yeah. Courtney Cox is Yzma. Yeah.
which I take that. That's very accurate. Gale Weathers is Yzma. Gale's one of the most interesting. I think she has the most arc if you watch the rest of the movies. I think she's the one that changes the most in this franchise.
Okay.
Well, how many other characters are even there to like continue on? Like Sydney's still there, right?
It's the three. It's the three. Sydney, Gale, and Dewey. Those are the main three.
Okay.
So you didn't like Tatum either, Jelani?
Nah.
I like Tatum.
She was cool because she seems like she was supposed to be what she was talking about, like the I don't know what word she used, like the ditzy type, but she wasn't up until she got killed. There were characters I disliked, and there were characters I was just neutral or didn't really care about. I don't think there was anybody I just liked. I don't know. Tatum was neutral. I didn't like... Well, it's a lot.
I enjoy Tatum. I think everyone deserves to have a friend like Tatum at one point in their life. Like, she's just your support system. I don't think Sydney could do anything wrong in Tatum's eyes, which is like
Classic
nice.
sidekick.
Yeah, like she's just a nice one to have. Like when she's hyping her up when she kicks Gale's ass, she's like, "Bam, Sid, super bitch." Like, what a good friend. Get you a friend that will endorse your assault.
And won't die in a doggy door.
She tried her best. I'll give
Yeah.
it to her. And it's
Get
the
you
most
someone that
iconic
can do
death in the whole
both.
fucking movie. Without a doubt. I think that's hands down the most iconic death of that film. So if there's one way to go, she did it right. She did it proper.
Okay.
See, that's the kind of thing when you watch like camp movies, it's like it teeters on that line of like it's not trying to be serious. So like it almost succumbs to its own entertainment value.
Mm.
which I think has some of like Tatum's instance. I think is like the most camp moment of the whole film because like what human can fit through a doggy door, and then there she goes and she gets lifted up. And like I didn't have an automatic garage door until like the mid 2000s, so I don't know what safety precautions they had in the 90s, but I'm pretty sure there's a weight limit. Like I'm pretty sure it wouldn't lift up. I think it would recognize that there's like an 130-pound weight keeping it down, but it still goes up because it's a horror movie and it's camp and it's a good time.
Like that elevator scene from, was it Final Destination 2?
See, that's another franchise that I find I've meant to talk about that, but it slipped my mind. I wonder if we ever get Final Destination without Scream, because Scream is meta, but I don't know if it gets more meta than a character literally seeing what's about to happen and then flashback or like cut to him actually it not happening yet because it was a vision and then he acts upon it. Like there's so many just unique takes in horror that I'm not sure we get if we don't get this movie. I'm not sure if we would have just been getting the same formula slasher films that were coming out in the 90s.
That's something I don't think I could watch. Like in
What,
its
Final
entirety.
Destination?
It paranoids that living hell out of me every time I watch it.
I recently rewatched the first one and it doesn't hold up. I used to enjoy those films as a kid, but no, it doesn't hold up.
As a kid, you watched Final Destination?
Oh, horrors were like, that's why I love horror so much. Like, I've watched my first horror movie when I was 4. It was Child's Play, and it was like, it just changed everything. That's why I love horror. It's just the most, I think, interesting and forward-thinking genre. I think a lot of trends that you see in other mainstream forms of film, you see a little bit earlier in horror because it is kind of like the ugly child that people don't put into the limelight.
Can you give an example?
I can't judge.
A lot of feminist cinema, queer cinema. You don't get these female leads in mainstream movies the way you get in horror. You don't get queer representation the way you get in horror. You don't get POC representation the way you get in horror.
With them getting killed first.
It depends. There's a lot of black horror films. I would not discredit black horror.
Mm-hmm.
Never discredit that.
Like Tales from the Hood.
Tales from the Hood's amazing. That's one of the best, especially that's a 90s movie that like, because 90 was, I think, hands down the weakest decade for horror. And these are like the shining diamonds in the rough.
I can't judge you watching movies. I'm pretty sure I was playing Mortal Kombat when I was like 7, so.
Oh yeah, I mean, and like my brother was playing Call of Duty, I was playing Call of Duty, but for horror movies, for me, I don't know, as a kid, I think a lot of broken people flock to horror. A lot of people who are victims of abuse flock to horror. There's something about the resilient nature about seeing someone who, against all odds, wins. And that's something that I think is why no matter what horror movies they pull in the numbers at the box office, they get the butts and seats. It's that visceral group thing.
How do you feel about horror movies that kill everybody then? Like there was one with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think, that killed everybody. And one of the Final Destinations did that as well. I think it was 3.
3 killed everyone?
Yeah. Which one had the roller coaster?
3.
Yeah, because was it... Oh, God, what is it? Mary Elizabeth Winstead was the lead. And they got on the train. And then she had the vision on the train. But then the light started to flicker. And, like, there was nothing they could do about it because they were already on the train. That pretty much sealed their fate.
I don't remember much of that film.
Mm-hmm.
That was the one that freaked me out the most because, like, at least within Final Destination, like the first one, like when you get on a plane, you're sealing your own fate. Like, you know, like at a certain point, it is what it is. But a roller coaster was something that was so not that for me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw that roller coaster derail, that really fucked me up. I was like, I don't want to ride roller coasters anymore. I didn't know this was possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But all of them, like, I'm never going to a racetrack because it was at 5. Never going to a racetrack.
Yeah, they've made so many. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with horror movies that kill off everybody. I don't even think I've seen that Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But that's interesting. That makes me want to watch them more. Like I'm not familiar with that, so I want to see what that impact is.
Yeah, I wish I could give you more examples, but yeah. I don't know.
They've tried to have there's this like kind of new POV in horror where like they're trying to humanize like the bad guys, which I think is bad. Like I don't think we need it. and like Don't Breathe was one of them, and now Don't Breathe 2.
Oh, God.
And it's just like, why is he the hero in the second one? Because like he literally like
Artificially
he wasn't
inseminated.
the worst in the first one, but he turns really bad once he takes the one girl and everything goes down in his basement. And it's like, I don't know, horror's at a really weird place right now. There's a few people that are doing it and they're doing it right, but I don't know. I think a lot of it is really bad, which is why I enjoy Scream, because I could just go back to a time when it was bad, but then it got good. So maybe it'll get good again.
Did Candyman come out?
Before?
No,
Yeah.
the new one.
Oh, the new, yes,
Yeah.
and it's really bad.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Yeah.
I had a friend at
It's
work
so
tell me it was
bad.
pretty good, but I have not seen it.
Mm-mm. It's so bad that like the Act 2 into Act 3 big kill got the biggest laugh in any movie theater I've ever seen in a horror film. Like, it was so not supposed to be a laugh. Like, it is the big Act 2 finale kill that sends us into the final 30 minutes of the film, and they do like this epic wide shot so you get everything and it's cinematic, and they cut the sound so it's chilling, and then the whole theater just erupted in laughter because it's so absurd. It's so, speaking of black horror films, the first Candyman is so good, and this is so bad. It just takes a shit on the first Candyman.
I wanted it to be good.
I did too. I paid money for that. At least I didn't pay for Malignant. I watched that on HBO Max and was like, yep, okay. That wasn't good. Didn't think it would be. Thank you.
What is that is that connected to The Conjuring?
It's not connected, but it's James Wan's movie, yeah. It's like his next horror movie IP, and it's really weird.
I just keep seeing pictures of some lady laying down and a knife going to her eye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The whole like the gimmick is like she had a conjoined twin. I think they were conjoined at like the brain, so they had to do surgery, and then she lives her life, and then she gets into an abusive relationship with her husband, and he pushes her and her head smacks the wall, and that like reactivates the signal between the child, whatever. I don't even know how to explain it to you. It is confusing, and that's why I like Scream, where I can say two psychopaths bought a costume and went on a murdering spree, and that's it. That's all I have to say, because that's the movie. I can't tell. Malignant's wild.
We were headed in the right direction with horror, weren't we? Like just a second ago.
I feel like we horror ebbs and flows. I think we get some good ones and we get some bad ones. Like, James Wan has had his staple in horror since Saw, and he makes his types of movies, and his audience comes out for it, and that's great and dandy. But we've started to see this more like art house turn in horror that is more sophisticated, which I don't mind, because I think there's a lot that could be done with it, but I just hope we continue seeing that level of sophistication, and we don't just like get like, what was that, the new M. Night Shyamalan movie that was supposed to kind of be a horror movie?
Old.
Yeah, like that. I don't want that.
What do you think of Spiral? Did you see Spiral?
I was so excited for Spiral. I remember when the trailer came out, and I was like, Chris Rock in a serious role. I'm ready for this. And it was the most devastating experience of my life to sit in that theater and watch that dumpster fire play out before my eyes.
Oh.
The script is garbage. The acting is garbage. It's exactly what you expect with its flashbacks and its terrible reveals. It has Chris Rock and Samuel Jackson playing father-son, and you'd think that is like a recipe for success, and it's just terrible.
I feel like I just hear the talking zebra the whole time.
It's really bad, because like you almost think like, is he being for real? Because Chris Rock's acting in it is so over the top. Like, there's a moment where he comes in and he's just screaming at the top of his lungs because he's like being an undercover cop pretending to be a bad guy, being a criminal, and he's just yelling at the top of his lungs. And like, as someone who appreciates the camp side of horror, I'm like, is this for real? Like, is he for real? Is this camp? Am I supposed to be laughing? But he kept it up. Like, he kept that energy up throughout the film, and I was like, this is his sincere portrayal. And it was really bad. And then the ending is terrible. It's just one of those like terrible cliche horror endings that make no sense that they use to try to get a sequel.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. So my thing is, I don't watch these movies. I just watch like, what are they called? Like overviews or breakdowns. Like, there's one channel, Cinema Summary, where it's the videos are just titled "How to Survive" or "How to Beat this movie," "How to Beat Spiral," "How to Beat Final Destination." That's how I end up knowing what happens in these now. Plus, he like censors the gore. I don't. As somebody who's played Mortal Kombat, the gore can be just a bit much for me sometimes in horror movies. I don't know how that sounds, but that's how I'm able
I think
to
especially with James Wan, he's kind of invented that gore porn, as they call it, with the Saw franchise. That wasn't really a thing before.
Yeah, it's a lot. Oh, and things like The Thing, that's just nasty. That's just gross. Come on, bro. Carpenter. Come on, man. I had to watch the original Thing, and I just didn't trust anybody around me that's what horror movies do to me. I just didn't trust, like, anybody normal around me for, like, the next week. I was like, are you the Thing? Are you... Are you part alien right now? Have you been assimilated? I was for the next week on the college campus, and ugh. The Fly too. The Fly was nasty. With Jeff Goldblum.
Horror's at a weird place right now because like the movies are real hit and miss, the TV shows are real hit and miss. I'd say like it really comes down to like the team behind it. Like I know Mike Flanagan, he makes pretty good horror, but even then like it really can be hit or miss. I don't know. I wish we had someone like Wes Craven still around who was still directing these movies and shining a light on stories that the general public either aren't ready for or don't want to be ready for. I've always really appreciated and respected him. And it kind of sucks that we lost that voice and we don't have it. I know Carpenter doesn't make films anymore, and we have like this new generation of horror directors, but no one has kind of risen and taken on that lead, especially when it comes to societal issues, because that's kind of at the heart of horror is the societal nature under it and why this is the issue. And I think that's something Craven was always able to show off. And even in Scream, they have that moment where she says you've watched too many movies, and he says movies don't make psychos, movies make psychos more creative. So there's always this kind of social commentary at work, or at least there should be in good horror, so it's not just like pointless. But I think we've gotten in that part of cinema, at least, where a lot of the horror movies we're getting are pointless. There isn't much to dive into. Not to come at James Wan's neck, but The Conjuring comes to mind. I think The Conjuring is one of the most overhyped movies and horror movies ever. I don't think it's saying anything. I don't think it's trying to say anything. I think it's a very average haunted house movie, and it's just because of the pocket when it got released, it blew up. And I just wish we had more voices in horror that said things.
Well said.
Yeah, amen to that. I mean, I'm not super invested in it, but yeah. I mean, that would maybe get me more interested if, like, because the experience of, like, the only, like, horror movie that I feel like I've experienced the way it was meant to be is A Quiet Place, where, like, I was, like, edge of my seat the whole time watching A Quiet Place. But anything else, no. And granted, that's a small sample size, but I also just know that I wouldn't be compelled by most other, like, slasher horror movies that I've heard of, which is why I don't watch them. But, you know, if it is making some kind of commentary, then that would draw me in. But I'm not the target audience, I guess.
I think I've said everything I have to say, so.
Yeah, I'm good on notes.
Same.
I'm good.
Okay. Our next episode is going to be Casino Royale. That's my pick. Pretty excited for that. Check out our YouTube channel. You can leave constructive criticism on there under any of the podcasts in the comments. We have our Patreon with bonus episodes. We referenced the Kingsman one in this episode. We also have a newish one. It's only about 5 minutes long. It's our like mini review of Space Jam 2 that kind of happened accidentally. Got merchandise on Zazzle. Our logo's by Kelsey Hendry. You can follow the show on Twitter at INTAnalysis18. I am on Twitter at Davos Watson. And where are both of you at?
I'm on Twitter at based_Phoenix, Instagram at basephoenix, Twitch jbasephoenix.
I'm on Instagram at David's Insta account.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.